Hi everyone. So last week I had a chance to record a video on symbols, and in response to that video there were some comments on the blog, and so I thought that this week, instead of moving on to the next topic, that I would just try to give a little bit more clarity on some of those issues. And I'm recording this week, by the way, from California, so forgive me if there's any background noise. But Okay, so one of the concerns that was brought up on this blog was that it's really nice in Flash that when you are using things in symbols, if you want to do something like you want to have a foreshortened arm, then it's quite easy to swap out that foreshortened arm, and it's also going to swap your hand into the appropriate position. So I just wanted to show two different ways of handling that kind of an issue in Toon Boom. And here I've got a very simple example where I've just got an arm that's made out of one piece. And this is a great way of showing this, because when you do something like a foreshortened arm, usually what you're going to do is you'll have you'll do the entire foreshortened arm on the upper arm, and then you'll keep your lower arm empty, or you'll have kind of a blank drawing in there as a placeholder. And then you'll draw the whole drawing in the upper arm, because it's easier to draw that as one piece. So let's say I want to move. Now I've got this first drawing, which works really nicely. I can animate my hand from here. Everything looks great. Animate the whole position of the arm. Everything looks great. Now I want to swap out to this arm. So at this point, there's two different ways of me doing this. I can either reposition the hand, like so, which truthfully doesn't take very long if you do want to reposition it. But if you do want it to swap into the appropriate location as well, there are ways of doing that. Now, the first thing is that I could actually save this new position here as a new template. So, for example, I can select those keyframes, and I can drag and drop those keyframes into here. And let me call this arm front bent keys. And then the other way of doing it, if you'll forgive me for undoing here for a second so I can get back to, whoops, actually I want to keep that template there. So let's go back to the previous keyframe here. I'll just erase the keyframe that I wrote on that hand layer, and I will swap back to the first hand. The only thing that keyframe was doing on the original hand was positioning the Z depth, so I could just fix that. Okay. So the first way is to save a template with the keys, but the other way is to actually swap the arm out, and then to have a second copy of this hand. I've duplicated the drawing, and I've moved the position to the new position, and I've also set the new pivot point so that it's good to go. So if you don't understand what I just did there, let's take a look in the drawing view, because the drawing view allows me to isolate just that drawing. If I look at the hand drawing on this swap, and then I swap it back to the first, you see that it's actually the position within the drawing view is changing. And this allows me to specify where that drawing exists in relation to the other drawings. And on top of that, I've also got a pivot point change on there as well. So that way is really nice, because now let's go back over here, because I can just swap this out, and I know that I have a version of this hand that goes with that arm. The only downside to this one, of course, is that you're going to have probably a lot of hands. So if you have a lot of foreshortened versions of your arm, you don't necessarily want to duplicate all your hands. And then you'll have a lot of hands to slide through in your library. So there's positives and negatives to doing it both ways, but either way you can create a template out of it. So if I have just done the swap, I've swapped that one out, I've swapped the second hand out, I can also create a template out of these ones, and let's call this arm front, whoops, bent, and we'll call this one instead swap. So I've got two versions of that template. I've got the keys and I've got the swap. Now let's just go back to that basic first frame that I had there, and let's extend the exposure of the drawing and show what the two different versions do. So if I use the swap and I swap those in, then all it's doing is it's swapping the drawing, It looks like there's keys on there, but those keys are just defining the Z depth. So, you know, it works really well. And actually what I'll also do is I'll just create a template there for arm front straight. So I can go back to the straight version if I want to. And now let's go on this key, on the 10th frame, we'll go back to the straight arm. Now let's extend the exposure again. So we'll see here, this is the first arm. I swap out the drawings, and I swap out the drawings again. Now if I use the keys version, and I drag the keys in here, you'll see it looks like it does the same thing, but the only difference is that you see that it's actually moving the position of the hand over time instead of swapping the drawing, and so you'll see there's some interpolation there. Now of course if you don't want to have the interpolation, you can just set the hand to be a stop motion keyframe, which means it's not going to interpolate from one position to the other. And so if you save that drawing with stop motion keyframes instead of motion keyframes, then this works just as well as the swap version does. So either way, whether you want to swap your drawings or whether you want to save templates and save templates with keys in them or save templates with swaps in them, there are a few different ways of working. And I know that that it probably seems a little bit more complex to wrap your head around these different ideas of templates and of drawing swaps and these being two different things. But hopefully this gives you a couple of ideas of some additional ways that you can think about the problems. But I think overall you're still either way going to have an easier time working on everything exposed on the main timeline than you would if you have to actually go inside a symbol to animate those elements. So hopefully I was able to convince you of that with this very simple demonstration of this hand. And of course when you're thinking about now scaling up from doing something that's a one-piece arm to doing multiple pieces, then you know it just becomes even more reason to stay on the main timeline, because the more pieces you have, the more you'd have to go inside the symbol to animate those elements, the more you're going to slow yourself down. So hopefully that cleared up some of the concerns about what would happen if you want to do something like a foreshortened arm. Of course, even if you wanted to just go the route of having to reposition things, there are a lot of studios that will work out there, and as they're working, they will reposition stuff. They will actually swap it out, and they'll just take a second to reposition it. There are a lot of studios that work that way. I think it's a personal taste factor, and there's also, I think, a certain amount of organic feeling when you're repositioning things, because if you reposition it this time, it's not going to be 100% the same way as the last time you repositioned it. And some people might think that's not a good thing, but in fact it is a good thing, because it means that your animation doesn't look so stiff, it doesn't look so mechanical, because it's always a little bit different. But you know, take what I say with a grain of salt and make your own decisions and try your own things out, and you know, let me know if you have any further questions and concerns after thinking about this a little bit more. Thanks.